Greetings YouTube, Kevlar Chicken here, and in today's video I will be discussing whetstone sharpening. Now, small disclaimer before we begin, I am in no way a licensed professional or sharpener. I will simply be going over the mistakes I've made, so hopefully I can save you some time. Now, without further ado, let's get into the video. So, before we begin, I'm pretty sure most of you already know this. However, for those of you who don't, I will give a brief description on what whetstones are and what whetstone sharpening is. For the rest of you, feel free to skip ahead on this video. I will also provide a chart for the grits, and feel free to pause that and read through it. This one is not super accurate, but it will give you an idea. Now, what are whetstones? Whetstones are abrasive tools used for sharpening blades such as knives, axes, and others. They consist of a block or slab made of various materials, including natural stones like water stones or whetstones, or synthetic stones made from materials like aluminum oxide or silicon carbide. Grit refers to the coarseness or finesse of the abrasive particles embedded into the whetstone. It indicates the level of abrasiveness or the size of the abrasive particles. The lower the grit number, the coarser the stone, and the higher the number, the finer the stone. A coarse grit such as a 240 grit, for example, is ideal for fixing up blades that are very dull, have chips, or need significant material removal. It quickly removes metal and helps reshape the blade's edge. As you move up to higher grits like 2000, the stones become finer and are suitable for honing and refining the edge. These medium to finishing stones are used to achieve a more polished and refined edge, improving cutting performance and sharpness. It is important to note that grit progression can vary depending on the specific sharpening needs and preferences. Some may prefer a more gradual progression with intermediate grits, while others may achieve satisfactory results with a coarser to finer approach. Now, what does this mean? It basically means that if you have a very dull knife, you need a stone that removes a lot of material, and that is usually the lower grit. However, if you already have a very sharp knife and you take it to a low grit stone, you might actually make it more duller. Excuse me. So in that case, you would just need to touch it up on a higher grit stone, which is finer, and the abrasive material is finer, so it will take off less material. But since you're sharpening something that's already sharp, you will simply want to fix up the small imperfections. Also, another little disclaimer: sharpening is a very broad topic, and I will not be going into any depth, because if you wish to research this further, there is a lot of free educational materials, and I would encourage you to go and explore that on your own. Now, there are many things that you can make as a mistake as a beginner in whetstone sharpening if you've gotten into this hobby, or you simply wanna just have this skill. But I will go over the 5 that I've made. Now, these are in no way the most important or the most common, it's just me sharing my experience. Now, the 5 things to avoid as a total beginner is first to soak your stones before use. This makes sure you don't cut into the stone, and it also feels just a lot better because when you build up the schlock, the stone, your knife or whatever you're trying to sharpen just glides better. And just soak your stones in 10 to 15 minutes in water, and that avoids damaging the stones or potentially your knife, because the sharpening just goes that much smoother. Now, second, this isn't actually a mistake I've made, but I think it's important. Use a cheap knife to practice on to avoid potentially damaging a more expensive blade of any kind, since I assume people who are watching this video are usually some type of knife collectors, kind of like I have a small collection. And if you try to use whetstones for the first time on your most expensive blade, you risk ruining it. I think that's an obvious one. The third one is keep a good angle and try not and don't remove the metal schlock that builds up. That's actually what is taking away material. You're grinding away at the stone, and the stone is grinding away at the metal, but that schlock is basically tiny metal and stone particles, and it's kind of like, well, it's an abrasive. It's, for those of you who know what an abrasive is, imagine it, you know how it works, and it just grinds away slowly at the edge. And if you keep up a good angle, you will be able to sharpen your knife or machete. Now, actually, the fourth one, we're up to number 4 already, is actually something that I did. I bought a katana that was, in the lower price ranges, but it was a functional one from Master Cutlery. You can see a review of it on my channel, and also a video of me cutting up water bottles if you're interested. However, my biggest mistake was trying to sharpen. One of the first thing I tried to sharpen was a katana, which is a lot harder than a knife. And if you've never sharpened a knife, something with a long blade with a more complex edge geometry is just a nightmare. So please, instead of going through the same hell that I did, please just do not do that. Start with a shorter blade. As I said, a sword, for example, a katana or machete, are much harder to sharpen due to the length of blade you need to cover. It is also a lot harder to keep up a correct angle with such a heavier blade, because you're trying to hold 2 pounds of steel on one end and sharpening the other at a correct angle, especially if you don't have a good stand. Like, for example, I don't. Also try to have a good stand so your whetstone doesn't move. Now, number 5, you'll see a lot of these YouTube videos, and this is kind of like a personal one, where they just take a knife and say it's very dull. But people who are into knives, usually their example of dull is most people's sharpest kitchen knife, and they take like 3 strokes on a 3000 grit stone, which wouldn't really do anything. And for most people who are trying to sharpen a knife for the first time, if you actually pick up a very dull knife that is actually damaged and has chips and nicks in it, you shouldn't go by the normal definition of what stone is coarse or not. You need to start as coarse as possible, because if it's actually severely dull, you will need a decent amount of pressure and a very coarse stone, so you remove a lot of material. Not that you cannot do this on a higher grit stone, but since the removal of material is so slow, it might take you hours on a severely dull or perhaps even chipped or nicked blade. We're not talking about unfixable, but let's say something that you really need to remove a lot of material. So that's number 5. If you're noticing that your blade is very dull, don't be afraid to put more pressure into it and use a coarser stone. And yeah, that's about it. Personally, since I don't need super sharp knives, I would recommend buying a very coarse stone if you're using it for camping and or processing wood, because you're not gonna keep hair shaving sharpness on it anyway, and you're just gonna need some field repairs, and even a diamond stone, a very coarse one, would be good enough for that. But if you can take 2 stones, for example, you can have a 240 grit and an 800 like the one that's in the footage, a double-sided one. I'm very happy with that one. I also have a very coarse one and a 2000 grit one, But if I could only pick one stone for my personal needs, I'm not saying yours are the same, I would just pick a double-sided stone with, let's say, something like 240 grit or 401 end, and 800 or 1000 on the other, because that will be good enough for most of your needs. And yeah, that's it. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you learned something, and like I said, this isn't meant to be anything more than a very beginner-ish guide to whetstone sharpening, and mostly this is my experience. If you wish to actually learn more, there is plenty of information on the internet and including here on YouTube, and I would encourage you to dive further by yourself and use the resources available. Also, like this is why I didn't mention things like stropping or anything, because I don't have a strop and I don't really do that. All I have is a honing rod. But yeah, I'm getting off topic. If you wish to learn more, I encourage you to do it by yourself, because like I said, I'm not a professional. This is just my experience. And leave a like, comment, subscribe if this was helpful and you learned something. If you want to see how my katana and machete performed after sharpening, you can check out my 2 cutting videos on my channel. And